2025. This is HOA Today. HOA Today is brought to you by Zayuk. Zayuk is a smart property technology company. We provide property owners, property managers, property vendors tools to manage their contracts, document their work, allocate the information across various stakeholders that they may work with. Those could be for contractors and vendors, their actual customers, for managers, their residents and their vendors, for owners, also their vendors, which include their managers and their fellow residents. So if you're on a board, if you are part of a company that provides property ownership services to various owners, HOAs, condos, Zayuk Safe gives you a platform to store your information, distribute your information, and give your properties a context to move forward with property ownership, where it feels as though even though the ownership has been fractionalized, even though it's a decentralized ownership model, HOAs and property, you still understand the context of what you're buying into. And that context includes three pillars that I always speak about. The first pillar is asset hygiene, curb appeal. What does the building look like? What does the property look like? Is it being kept up? How's the pavement? How's the balconies? How is the painting, the landscaping, all these various things that curb appeal. That's what we think about it, but also things like roofing, and if there's an elevator or various other common element systems, HVAC, electrical, those are very difficult to interpret, and you likely will not be able to as a home buyer, as a property owner, as a property buyer, but you can tell, does this place look like it's being kept up or not? That's called curb appeal. 2, financial hygiene. So before you purchase, make sure to get the budgets, get the reserve studies, understand if there had been a special assessment within the last several years, understand if there's a special assessment coming up in the next several years. Check the reserve study to see, is there enough money in the bank for this organization to handle all the property items, the property maintenance items that are coming in the next several years? And so assessments, budgets, reserve study, and determine also how the assessments have gone in the last several years. Have they been increasing their assessments by a large amount? Many associations have, because items like mostly insurance have come to forefront, and also end of life, EOL, has come for many buildings. Not necessarily end of life, but an inflection point where if there hasn't been maintenance, a lot of real estate, a lot of infrastructure in the United States is coming to that point where a negligence in maintenance comes to head. 40-year-old buildings, 50-year-old buildings, 60-year-old buildings built in the 60s, 70s, 80s. If the maintenance hasn't been kept up, that becomes an issue. And you combine that with insurance, you combine that with extreme weather patterns in particular states, Florida with their tornadoes, California with their fires, Minnesota has snow and wind, extreme snowfall. it adds up. So that's number 2 is financial hygiene. And then 3, probably one of the most overlooked items in purchasing an HOA, condo association, or in a co-op is governance. The rules under which you will be obligated to live by or own by if you're an investor looking to rent out that condo versus if you are a homeowner looking to live there. If you're a homeowner looking to live there, as I've spoken about before, it becomes difficult to be told you can't do this or you must do this in a space that is your home, a space that you purchased, a space you pay taxes on, a space you feel is yours, and you're being told you can't do this or you can do this. It is a difficult pill for people to swallow. And that's why the pillar of governance, understanding the rules, is so critical, because people will often ignore the rules, overlook the rules before purchasing, really considering things like curb appeal, which we spoke about, demographics or location. Is this near a school for my kids? Is this near my place of work so I don't need to make large commutes? But rarely will they consider what is the rules under which I will be forced to live by if I purchase in this home. And very often when we go through current events in HOAs, in condo associations, the issue is 2, financial, which usually goes back to 1, is the asset hygiene. So if the asset hygiene is really lacking, then eventually that will affect the financial hygiene. But so financial hygiene becomes a huge issue. And then 2 is governance. When people are in disputes with their HOAs or with fellow residents of the HOA because of rules. And many people don't like rules. I saw one instance recently in Los Angeles where one neighbor felt they needed to blast an alarm for their own safety, and the fellow neighbors couldn't do anything. And in that case, that becomes an issue where an HOA would be helpful. I mean, when it becomes a huge deal for the neighbors, if you don't have an HOA, there's really little to be done, little governance around that area. And let's continue. Give me one moment. State of peace or the state of ambiance, the environment that which the association is or the property will live by. And when you don't have that, you really are at the whim of the people you live around much more. We will begin first. This is an interesting article from realtor.com. Florida lawmaker wants to abolish HOAs. Could the failed experiment really end? This is by Alaire Conta. Around the country, frustration with HOAs is bubbling over. In Florida, it's reaching a boiling point. Fees, rules, heavy-handed enforcement, extreme consequences. One homeowner spent a week in jail. That was Irena Green I believe it was because of her lawn. Another homeowner faced foreclosure after a lawsuit. What critics HOA overreach, and now a South Florida lawmaker says it's time to end the system entirely. State Representative Juan Carlos Porras has proposed abolishing HOAs in Florida outright, calling them a failed experiment. This would fundamentally reshape nearly 9.5 million Floridians. lives. Homeowner associations are booming nationwide. In 2024, more than 40% of listings came with an HOA fee. 374,000 associations. And there was just 10,000 in 1970. Florida is second to California. New homes are far more likely than older properties to be built within HOA-governed communities. Developers in recent decades have leaned heavily on the model. HOAs help them market neighborhoods as well-kept and amenity-rich, and shifting the cost of services away from local governments. That's really interesting. I mean, that's obvious, but this is what we spoke about too. We spoke about Bull Valley HOA having a 20-acre nature reserve, which in their governance items was actually required to be upkept. We spoke about homeowner associations in Hawaii being required at this point to keep the grounds around their property because it's filled with overbrush. It's filled with potential brush fire that could affect their home. And if the government isn't handling it, the local municipality, you're going to be the one, the homeowner, the property owner is going to be the one to suffer at the end of the day. Even if they're not handling it, you as a property owner need to handle it because you're going to be the one to pay the price. If something extreme happens, if another fire brushes out and it reaches your property, then it becomes a huge issue. And that's where Zayuk Safe with our reality capture inspection goes above what existing tools do. And we really take advantage of the new digital twin style of infrastructure, smart city systems, smart contract systems, decentralized contract management, where you don't have stakeholders that own your information and you are at their whim. That's the number one issue, I believe, that's the root of most of the issues in decentralized property ownership is the distribution and allocation of information and how the property's information is across so many different sources. And when that is solved, which Zayuk plays a big part in through our contract management system, through our property inspections, where you get survey grade level reality captures or 3D models to begin to work in visual context and provide visual context for your vendors. And that's going to lower the cost of proposals. You need someone to come and possibly do work on your roof. Well, they need to come out and know the dimensions of your roof. Well, what if you have the dimensions of your roof? And you can distribute that across everyone. That's what Zayuk Safe does. And we give you a context to move forward with. The smart property system. So we'll continue here. Florida accounted for 12% of all new construction permits nationwide. Ever expanding network. One moment. Ever expanding network of associations with more than 50,000 HOAs. National median HOA fee is $143. But in places like Edwards, Colorado, that's $525. And then various legislation has been passed in the last 4 years in Florida to address the rising costs of condo ownership. But this article by Alaire Conte is stating it didn't address single family HOAs. Extreme or over enforcement of community bylaws. And this is related to being jailed for not upkeeping your lawn, which was an extreme case. That is very extreme. And there are other issues that come into play, like AB 130, Assembly Bill 130 here in California, which limited fees to $100. And that's in response to extreme fees being levied. And I know, being in an association, I was in a fraternity association in college, and it was very similar, very similar. Dues, governance, executive, decentralized ownership. No one really owned, there were no owners, and everyone was an owner. Although we had nationals, which made it different, but people don't react well to being fined, especially when they're already paying. It again, it's a point, it's a really hard sticking point for people. And not to say it's wrong or right, but people react very poorly to being fined by their association, an association that they already pay for. If they feel that that's an unjustified fine, which is usually subjective until no, it should be objective. I'm not a lawyer, none of this is legal advice, but that's the purpose of law and the legal system, is to make that objective. Condominiums. Yeah, so this is something I always say. It would be very difficult to remove HOAs. What needs to occur is the system needs to be altered by decentralizing nearly everything, not allowing individuals to have information, and for the information to be stored in a decentralized manner where you don't have stakeholders that have privileged information based on being incumbents or based on having the role. That's the big difference. And it becomes a sticking point both ways for vendors, because when you're an incumbent on a contract for a vendor for a property, you've got some privileged information. And when you're not an incumbent, you're also not with privileged information. So it goes both ways. But at the end of the day, for the property themselves, maintaining their information, getting a reserve study inspection done with Zayuk so that we take the reality capture, so that we give you a survey grade level model, so that you have a store of information for future vendors and for future owners to really get a context that they're able to work with and they understand. The visual context, a 3D model, is very important. So we'll continue. HOAs have faced mounting scrutiny over fee hikes, lawsuits, and highly publicized clashes between residents and boards. HOA communities sell for 5 to 6% more than comparable homes without them. I personally believe homeowner associations are surely in the benefit of people who want to own where they live, because if you want to own property, then you don't need to maintain it necessarily. You should be aware of the governance of the property, and that's where being a property owner turns into a business, and many people don't respect that or own that enough, which is understandable because most people just want to invest, have a store of value that they're pretty sure is going to appreciate, and they also like where they live and they feel like they're an owner. They're like, all right, I don't have a landlord here to tell me what to do and what to not do, or feel like I got to give rent to this landlord. Granted, you have mortgage and you have the HOA fees and you have property taxes and insurance, but no one's really like, okay, you can't do this. You might be kicked out this year. What are you doing? And I think that's one reason people like being homeowners. But and you do give up a sort of level of authority with your governance, and certain things you do give up. But that's why governance is the third pillar, and what I say you should understand when you purchase in an HOA or a condo association, because you might be giving up something, but at the same time, you don't have to maintain roofing. You don't have to worry about maintaining the landscaping. What you should surely worry about is who is running the whole thing. That is important. That is something that will never not be important, to understand your vendors, to understand the vendor allocation and appropriation, and how your money is being spent on certain items and vendors and issues and things occurring within the association. It becomes very that becomes the most important thing, because if you can get vendors in there that you trust, that are verifiable, that you feel are doing the right thing, then very likely you're going to be able to at least allocate some thinking and some care to the board. Whereas if you have, and this is much more difficult than I'm making it sound to be. I'm making it sound as, oh, all you need to do is get a good board in there and a good manager, and then boom, 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 easy peasy. It's not that simple. It's not that easy. It's very complicated. These are other people's homes as well. People can have complexes because there is power and governance involved, and it becomes a fragile issue. But at the same time, it's super important. And if you're willing to own an association and you want to make that a store of value for yourself, you need to be able to trust and understand the people at the top. And that means the manager, that means the board, and we'll just continue. And in those cases, when you can do that and you feel as though they are doing a good job, it's really beneficial. And as this article states as well, the need and the requirements across various properties is not the same. If you share walls, you're going to share electricity, plumbing, HVAC, roofing, stucco, one flooring, elevators. It becomes a hugely different issue. Staircases, balconies, patios, versus single family homes where you might have the sidewalk, might have some amenities, a clubhouse, might have certain pickleball courts and landscaping, possibly large amounts of landscaping needs, but you're not going to be sharing walls. And when you don't share walls, I don't know if that's the necessarily point. I think that's a very obvious point that we can all see. When you share a wall, you can hear sometimes your neighbor much more finely than you can if you don't share walls. Again, you're going to share several systems, and once you share systems, defining ownership becomes critical, because when you have lots and lots of land, then it's pretty obvious where ownership starts and ends. But when you share walls and roofs and ceilings and floors and systems like plumbing, HVAC, electrical, roofing, stucco, structural systems, the complexity and the need of allocating and distributing that capital is much more complicated, much more. It needs to be tracked. And the reason people are so upset with HOAs today, and these articles are coming out and these laws are coming out, is because it's such an easy system to take advantage of. Frankly, it's really easy because of the lack of tools and the lack of transparency tools and the lack of decentralized financial management systems. Zayuk is a decentralized financial management system specified towards properties. We consider ourselves a Web3 company in the sense that we bring data visuals, along with financial management tools into one software. When you think of NFTs, you probably think of art, digital art. When I think of NFTs, I think of the water heaters in a building. I think of tokenized HVAC systems across one building. I think about roofing in another building. I think about these assets and how the transactions occur between homeowners and managers and vendors on various pieces of property within a property. Because again, this is a system of systems where you have various systems on your property. A building and a property is a system of systems. You have a roofing system, you have a stucco system, you have an electrical system, you have a landscaping system, a security system, water plumbing system, HVAC system, and all of these systems have experts. And all of these experts need to be brought onto the property to maintain it. And how you organize the capital around that has been under scrutiny. And that's where Zayuk comes in, because it's not just about the finances, it's about the assets that the finances are coming together to help manage. That's what the capital is about. It's not about money as much as it's about property. So we'll continue. Willow Ridge neighborhood. This is by Yahoo News. A Colorado community thought it was getting a new pickleball court. Instead, it got pricey flop that wound up in the trash. Convert its old tennis courts into pickleball space. $140,000 renovation using plastic versatiles. Uneven surface, cracked and unsafe to play on. Delivered poor bounce back during games. One woman fell and hurt her wrist. I can't imagine that falling would not have the potential to hurt your wrist. I'm not a lawyer, and none of this is legal advice, but on a real pickleball court either. But it could be, again, I'm not a lawyer, but it could have happened because there's a crack, like this thing said. Looks can be deceiving. The community removed the entire court and paid an extra $3,600 to haul and dump it, bringing the total to just under $144,000. Waste of money, materials, and community potential. HOAs have come under fire for greenlighting flashy and effective projects while blocking practical, eco-conscious updates, like swapping lawns for native plants or collecting rainwater. That's true. This is very true. So being practical is really important. Landscaping can be a lot of money. Sprinkler systems can be a lot of money here in Southern California. And again, people don't necessarily like it all comes with its potential downfalls and non-downfalls. For example, if you have dogs and you want to go to an eco type of succulent, cactus, dirt path, well, the issue is what happens when people don't pick up their dog's feces. That becomes a huge issue. There's another problem, but then it goes from being a problem to being noticeably horrible. And many other things occur. Like one time someone spoke about a particular case with ivy rushing up, and you don't think about things like if you remove the ivy and dogs continue to urinate there, it's that ivy actually somewhat soaks up that stink and that smell. And I'm not a landscaping expert, but these are types of considerations that it's very important to speak to professionals, to not make assumptions. Okay, we'll go through one more article and then continue. Actually, we're going to cut it just right now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is HOA Today. HOA Today is brought to you by Zayuk Smart Property System. Zayuk is for homeowners, for property owners who own property in complex, large properties. HOAs, condos is what our system's built for. It's built for HOAs and condo associations. Zayuk Safe. We come in, we do your reserve study inspection with the reality capture, where you can actually begin to integrate what you get on both sides. So you can begin to work in a context that everybody understands the reserve study, the survey grade level asset itself, and various other issues within the property.